Today we're going to look at two different books. One we've already seen called From Seed to Plant, and then we're going to start a new one called What is Pollination? Today's learning target is I can discuss and write about the process of pollination. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at a little bit of information that we already read in this book, From Seed to Plant. And remember, this book's on Epic. I was just looking at this page right here from this book, showing some different parts of the flower. Because when we're talking about pollination, the pollen has to come from somewhere, right? The pollen has to come from inside the flower. So let's look at a couple of these parts here. So we have the petal, which is like, it's kind of leafy, isn't it? It's the flower petal, and it's one of the separate leaves that form the outer part of a flower head. And they're usually a different color from the plant's other leaves. Then we have the stamen, and these right here, these are like these long stems up to the stamen. These are called the stamen. They have this long stem and then this thing here, and that's where the pollen is produced. So this plant has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. Then we have the stigma, and this is actually where the plant receives pollen. Is right here. So the pollen comes out here, and then when a plant gets pollinated, it has to get some pollen right here on the stigma. And then the pollen, of course, is that fine yellow powder made by the flowering plant. So pollination is when a grain of pollen moves from one flower to another flower like itself. But how does it move? And that's what we're going to learn about today, is how it moves. Now, we learned that sometimes wind can do it. Sometimes insects or birds can move it. And then when that pollen lands on the pistil of the same kind of flower, that's the beginning of a seed that grows into the fruit. And then when the fruit or pod ripens, it breaks open, and then the seeds are ready to become new plants. This was such an interesting book. So, the next thing that I have for us today was back on the slides. This was our guiding question we were trying to find an answer to. How do pollinators help plants grow and survive? And I bet you already know some of this, because you're going to need a pollinator so that if the plant doesn't get pollinated, it can't grow a new seed and it can't make more of itself. Let's look at some of these up-close images of some of these pollinators here. This little guy's covered in pollen. These are some pollinators. These are some pollinators. Gosh, this one's almost as big as the whole top of the flower. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to think about the pollination process, and I have some pictures for you, and you have this sheet in your folder, in your pollinators packet. This is the sheet I'm talking about. This is in your pollinators packet, and it says, what is pollination? Describe the process of pollination using the pictures below. Let's see. So first this picture happens, then this picture, and then this picture. Let's see if I can do this. Well, I see there's pollinator in here, so that's probably getting it started. And it's got an arrow pointing to the nectar. Okay, I bet this pollinator's in here getting some nectar. And while the pollinator's getting some nectar, some pollen is rubbing off on the pollinator. And then I think he's going to fly over here to another flower, and the pollen is going to rub off from this flower that was stuck to the bee. It's going to rub off into the next flower and then pollinate that flower. And then the last thing that's going to happen is now a seed can grow, and you can start to see that seed to grow. So today for independent work, the first thing you're going to do is you are going to write a sentence or two in each one of these boxes of what is happening as part of the pollination process. What's happening here, what is happening here, and what is happening here. All right, the next thing we're going to do then is we are going to take a look at our next book. So that was From Seed to Plant, the book I showed you earlier. And now we're going to look at this book called What is Pollination? And it's on Epic. So here we go. What is Pollination by Bobby Kallman. All right, we're only going to look at about the first half of this book today because we're going to do the second half on our other day. So let's look in here. Now, I'm surprised it doesn't have a table of contents. It just jumps right into the first section. Always read your headings, right? And then always take some time and look at your pictures and your captions. So this book starts here on page 4 and 5. This is a long book. So this last page here was 31. So 27 pages long. So let's do the first 13 today, okay? But we're starting on page 4. So we're going to read to about page 17. Let's just remember that we're going to stop after the bees are best section. Okay. What is pollination? What is pollen? Pollen is the yellow, white, or brown powder at the center of most flowers. Pollen is an important food for bees and some other animals. The bee on the left is covered in pollen. Bees collect pollen in pollen sacs. Look at that. If you look real closely here, this is like a diagram because it's showing you there's the pollen sac. An important part of flowers. Pollen is a very important part of many flowers. It is the part of a flower that plants need to make fruit, seeds, and new plants. To make new plants, pollen has to move from one flower part to another of the same kind of flower. Most flowers need pollinators to move their pollen. Pollinators are animals such as bees, wasps, butterflies, and other small animals that visit flowers. See that bold word there, pollinators? That tells me that word is important, and it's going to be in the glossary at the back of this book. This bee, or this beetle, has pollen all over its body. When it goes to another flower of the same kind, it will leave pollen on that flower, and the flower will then be able to make seeds. But we already knew that from our other book. What is pollination? Some flowers have male and female parts. The stamen is the male part of the plant that makes pollen. Some flowers have one stamen and others have many. I think in the other book, that other flower had 5 different ones, didn't it? It had 5 stamen. The pistil is the female part of the flower. It is made up of the style, stigma, and ovary. The stigma is the top part. It receives the pollen. The style is the pollen tube. The pollen travels down through the style to the ovary. The ovary contains ovules. Trying to see where the pollen is going to come in through the stigma and it's going to travel down through the style, which, okay, this is the style, down to the ovary where the ovule is. Okay, so pollen's got to come all the way down into here. How a plant grows. When pollen moves from stamen to a stigma, pollination has taken place. After a flower is pollinated, its petals fall off. The ovaries of the flowers become fruit and the ovules become seeds. The fruit of a plant can be a vegetable or nut as well as fruit. The fruit of the bean plant below are the bean pods. The seeds are the beans inside the pods. And we planted some beans, didn't we, in our class sprouters. So we're going to watch as those become plants. Types of pollination. Flowers cannot make seeds unless they are pollinated. There are 3 main types of pollination: cross-pollination, self-pollination, and wind pollination. Those are the 3 types of pollination. That's why this heading is here, to tell us what they're about to tell us. In cross-pollination, flowers need pollen from other flowers of the same species or type to land on their pistils. That's the one that we were That's the one we were just looking at, where like an animal, such as an insect and a bird, carries pollen from flower to flower. So the cross-pollination is the one we've been looking at, where the insect or the bird takes it from one place to another. Let's look at this picture here. Sometimes I like to zoom in on the picture before I read the caption. Okay. This bee is cross-pollinating. It is carrying pollen from one flower to another of the same kind. Self-pollination. During self-pollination, pollen moves from the stamen to the pistil of the same flower. Oh, so it doesn't have to be transferred from one flower to another flower. It can happen all on the same flower. So pollen can move on the same flower. It says flowers that self-pollinate have male and female parts that are close together. So the pollen can move easily from the stamen to the pistil. Sunflowers can self-pollinate or be cross-pollinated. Wow, that's pretty cool then. So the sunflower just within itself can make more of itself. Wind pollination. Some flowers are pollinated by the wind. Wind sweeps pollen off those flowers and carries it to other flowers. Wind-pollinated flowers have millions of tiny pollen grains. These flowers seldom have nectar. Ragweed flowers are wind-pollinated. Many people are very allergic to ragweed pollen. And when we were at Dunn the other day and we were collecting some seeds, I think we found a couple of those things that we could, and they would just spread seeds everywhere, right? That's what that's making me think of, wind pollination. Shapes and colors. Most animals pollinate when they look for nectar. Nectar is a liquid found in many flowers. The bright colors and sweet smell of a flower tells pollinators that the flower contains nectar or pollen for them to eat. That's why the flower's petals are different colors from the leaves. Those bright colors tell the pollinator that the flower has nectar for them. Flowers that are pollinated at night have very strong scents to make it easier for pollinators to find them. The loon moth is a beautiful nighttime pollinator. Orchids have special markings that guide insects to their nectar. A paper kite butterfly is pollinating an orchid. The jack in the pulpit plant does not smell sweet. In fact, it smells like dead meat. This plant attracts flies to pollinate it. Well, no wonder it smells like that, because flies love that smell, don't they? Hummingbirds have long beaks and very long tongues. They are able to feed at flowers that are too deep or thin for other pollinators to reach. So this long beak here, they can just kind of poke it in and get deep down in there to feed. And then I guess they're going to get some pollen on themselves too. Do we need pollinators? Did you know that more than 1/3 of the food you eat depends on pollinators? Pollinators make plants healthier so they can make a lot of food. There are thousands of kinds of pollinators. Most vegetables, fruits, and nuts come from plants that were pollinated by insects, birds, bats, and other small animals. All these foods. The food showed on this page and many more came from plants that were pollinated by insects and other animals. Oh my gosh, how many of these delicious things do you like? Even chocolate? We even have chocolate because of pollinators? Wow. All right, and I said I was going to stop today. Didn't I say that, or did I say I was going to go on to, no, I think I said I was going to stop at bees are the best. Okay. Insect pollinators. There are thousands of kinds of insects that pollinate plants. They belong to 5 main groups: bees, wasps, butterflies and moths, flies, and beetles. Without these insects, we would not have many of the foods we eat. And then look, each one of these photographs here has a little caption that's really just telling you what that insect is. Bees, wasps, moth, butterfly, flies, beetles. Bees are best? Gosh, I would have never thought that. I always think of getting stung when I think of a bee, but let's see what they're telling us. There are thousands of kinds of bees, but the honeybee is the most important pollinator. Honeybees are social insects. Social insects live together in groups called colonies. Each bee colony lives in a hive, which is its home. Bees collect nectar and pollen from flowers. They pollinate many kinds of fruit trees as well as vegetable plants. They also make honey, which people eat. Bumblebees. The bumblebee is another kind of bee pollinator. There are about 250 species of bumblebees. Bumblebees have big furry bodies. Like honeybees, these bees live in colonies of 150 to 200 bees. Bumblebees make their nests underground. The tongues of some bumblebees are short and others are long. The long-tongued bees are important pollinators of many plants, such as beans, tomatoes, and clover. Okay, so the next part of your work today, now that we've read through these pages, and this book is on Epic, and I'm going to put the link to this book in this assignment also, so you can either go back and listen to me reread to find information, or you can just look yourself on Epic. But we need to remember our text features that we've been studying, because we're going to be using these things to help us find information today. So I know that I said I didn't see a table of contents in there. That was strange, wasn't it? But I certainly saw those headings. And that told us what the section was going to be about. I saw the captions that told us about some of those photographs. Some diagrams where it shows you the part. Labels that name a part of something. We didn't look at the glossary today. But remember, the glossary is going to have all your bold words in it. And your bold print, which they've put bold print in bold print, is going to help you notice the important words that will be in the glossary. And then, of course, photographs and illustrations. And we saw lots of photographs today to show you exactly what they're talking about. So the second part of today's assignment is on the back of the sheet that you just did in the first part, where you described the 3 steps of pollination. So what you're going to do is you're going to do this page. We're going to start the text features hunt today, and we'll finish it in the next lesson. So I want you to try to find the answers to these 3 things. The first thing says, on what page is the chapter called Beetle Pollinators found? So you're going to use that book on Epic, and you're going to click through and find that chapter called Beetle Pollinators and tell me what page it's on. The second thing says look for labels on page 12 and 13. What is a blue food listed there? And then this one says use the glossary to find the definition of the word nectar. Where will you find the glossary? All the way at the end of the book, okay? So you may have to, on that book on Epic, you may have to go tick, 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 all the way to the end till you see the glossary. And the glossary will give you the definition for the word nectar, and then you can fill it in right here. Okay, so as long as you do these 3, you are now finished for the day. Good work, guys. I'll see you next time.